Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be starting off my An Idiot Discusses series. So this is going to be An Idiot Discusses Transformers Terminology. Now, before I get into the weeds, Transformers terminology, it's not just terminology within the franchise itself, but also fan terminology. So I'll be covering it a good bit, and I'll try to include um, images. I might just try out like clipping and seeing how that works out. I do want to be careful again as I'm new to this. I'm still learning a lot of the ropes, regardless of how many times I've watched other YouTubers and their videos. I don't want to risk destroying anything before I even get to start, right? Um, but with that being said, the first on my list is Cyclonus' Armada, or, and this is in quotes, and his Armada. Um, and this is a moment from the original Transformers series. I think it actually came out of the movie. Could be wrong. I should have taken notes on that. Again, this is called the An Idiot Discusses series for a reason. Um, but a character gets rebuilt into this character called Cyclonus, and this is in reference to Cyclonus and the group of other Transformers that Unicron put under Cyclonus's command, or it could be to mean Cyclonus and one lookalike of Cyclonus, or a squadron of another character that was rebuilt and his underlings, Scourge and the Sweeps. Um, with how I recall it, it looked like it was describing the entirety of that group. However, interpretation of that, it feels weird because Scourge is known as Scourge the Hunter or Huntsman. Dang it, I should have taken that note down too. But and then the Sweeps, but in this case, it's just a jumbled mess, right? And that's just a fan terminology. Um, Again, it's not the end all be all. This is just random stuff that is known throughout or is used throughout the franchise. The next is army building. So multiple identical toys of the same character. Normally, it's a very generic character that you can get a whole bunch of, um, kind of in the same way of like stormtroopers, right? So if I have an army of Transformers that look like Bumblebee, but in different colors, and they don't have any specific storyline, I would consider that almost like an almost adjacent to army building. But if I know it's a very generic character that has, or a character design, and they're featured as like a soldier, I'm going to buy like, eh, I'll go with five just to, you know, not spend a metric butt ton on building this army, well, that in limited space. But that's more or less army building. Auto transformation, which is a reference to anything of a transformer being manipulated without you or without the person transforming it manually. So if I were to like bend a transformer's knee to start transformation and certain panels moved into place, that'd be considered auto transformation. If I were to, I think there's like the flip changers or something where you just pull out the sides of the vehicle and constantly flip this toy around and it transforms into its robot mode automatically. So it's that kind of thing. Black Redeco. So Black Redecos are typically the a character where the plastic color that's changing um, from its original base color. So again, I'm going to refer to Bumblebee because he's bright yellow. A Black Redeco would be that same figure but with black plastic, and then a similar paint applications, and it may feature different paint applications. Um, Blastification. So blastification is adding part of blast as a name. Sometimes it was as a means of attempting to have a copyright for that name. Um, and a example of that is instead of it being shock wave, it being shock blast, right? Shock wave is a very generic term when it comes to referencing like missiles going off or buildings falling. So in order to copyright it, why not use shock blast? And the success of this attempt works on may or may not work. It's all varied. In some cases, it doesn't because it's another very generic term rather than a very specific term that you don't expect to ever be used again. This one I never knew there was a term for. It's called the bludgeon effect. So when the figure or toy is released, it's not very cared for. It could be stuck on the shelf or it's not a huge deal, but then later on in the future, that price skyrockets because that character becomes relevant or significant. Um, so, like, say I were to have this very generic character that doesn't look all that different or doesn't stand out as a figure, and I put it on a shelf and it stays that way. Eventually, the figures are canceled or something, or I start a new series, and then that series features that character in a very prominent role, but never released his figure. Well, now that older figure is now 3, 4, 10 times that original value. Um, Brick. Brick is something I'll hear in many franchises, not just in Transformers, but it's a figure with little to no posability, so no moving shoulders, no moving hips, no moving knees, no elbows, nothing. Just absolutely nothing. It's what it is a brick. Or sometimes I like to call them paperweights. Um, Burning Spirit. So, Burning Spirit is featured with prominent characters most of the time, where they suddenly gain this new power level, either caused by positive relief or not relief, belief. So, oh, we believe in you, or the spirit of camaraderie, that kind of thing, right? And all of a sudden, they start glowing or become a significantly brighter featured character. Um, and again, I'm reading this from my notes, so there's probably a lot that I've missed. Um, Next is Coneheads. So Coneheads are, and I'll squeeze in Seekers with this, is they're typically jet transformers based off of a Starscream mold. Now, Coneheads are, they have basically caution cones for a head shape. Seekers are just the jet style with some altercations, but or alterations, but both of those kind of fall under a similar window or umbrella because they're related to a very specific group of Transformers. Next is fan mode, which again, kind of a simple one. It's an unofficial mode. Um, Normally, it's featured with something funny or goofy or related to that character when they don't transform into that their original object. So I'll use Soundwave for this one. Say he turns into this Cybertronian ship, air quotes on that, but then fans find a way to transform it to make it look like he turns into similar to a cassette or stereo. Um, that's it for fan mode. Uh, FIRRIB, also known as RIBFIR or RIRFIB, fib rear fib. It, and what that's referencing to is two little cassette characters that worked with Soundwave. Um, and the acronym stands for either Frenzy is Red, Rumble is Blue, or Rumble is Blue, Frenzy is Red, or Rumble is Red, Frenzy is Blue. Um, and that's because in the various forms of media from Transformers in that day and age, they had either Frenzy labeled on a character that or the toy that was red, or the character featured in the show that was red. But then next time they have Frenzy featured as the blue character rather than the red one. It's a goofy thing. I think the names are very fitting for the acronym. Frenzy is red, Rumble is blue. I see more of a frenzied state being red. It just makes sense to me. But again, that's just how it works in my head. But that's a term you'll see a lot of if when it comes to that kind of thing where one of these characters is released as a toy, right? Um, G1. Now, this one's spelt entirely different than how it sounds. Well, not entirely different than how it sounds, but how you would normally see it. So it's G as in golf, Echo Echo, Whiskey, Uniform, November. And what this is just a term that's kind of snarky to identify people who have a hard time accepting anything other than the original Generation 1 incarnations. Jam. This one, I still remember the first time I saw it, and I turned bright red from laughing too much at it because it's in reference to a very specific Transformer in the series of Transformers Armada and his love for this substance of some sort. It just looks like jam. Um, but when the artist was, or when this moment happened, it it was spelt very oddly with a standout capital A and a lowercase a to kind of emphasize just how much excitement this character had towards that substance. Um, Kibble. So Kibble is different pieces of the alt mode so vehicle mode, animal mode, the mode that's not their primary like fighting robot mode, pieces of that hanging off of the robot mode. Um, no, not the kibbles and bits that you see for pet food. Um, Mint in sealed box, or MISB, or mint on sealed card, MOSC. Um, that's in reference to the original product having not been opened and it just left in this box. Um, there will be times that you can tell whether it's true to that or not based off of like a tape seal or a glue seal or the particular materials holding that character into place because as Transformers has grown and adapted throughout the years, they've used different means of holding figures in boxes. So it used to be these little twisty ties that were, I think, a clear plastic over a bendable metal wire and then twist together just to hold it in place. Um, Part former. A part former is a transformer that just explodes into tiny little bits and pieces, and then you transform individual pieces, connect them back together, and now you have either their robot mode or their alt mode, disguise mode. Honestly, I should have included alt mode as part of this. Pokeformer. Pokeformer is in reference to the probably one of my favorite forms of Transformers, which is Minicons. They're these little tiny Transformers that unlock certain abilities or enhance certain characters from the Transformers Armada franchise or series, but also Energon and Unicron, Cybertron, not Unicron. So the the Unicron trilogy is Transformers Armada, Energon, and Cybertron. But these little mini cons are featured prominently in those three series, and their nickname is Pokeformers. Repaint, it's similar to the Black Redeco, but instead of it being a specific color, it's just paint changes on a figure. And Redeco should have been covered in this as well, but it's you take a base character and you either change the base plastic color or the paint applications to kind of change it up a little bit, that kind of thing. Um, Next is shelf warmer. I kind of covered this in one of my other videos, and again, I have to say that slowly because it sounds like another term I'm going to cover in just a second. So a shelf warmer is a toy or a handful of toys that take up space on shelves in stores and just doesn't sell. Bumblebee is one of the more notorious for that because there's been way too many Bumblebee toys for me to keep track of released. Um, the word to follow that up is shell former. So that's why I want to take my time to pronunciate it. Um, Shell formers are robots that basically have an egg around them or a shell or a ball or look like they're just a robot in a box. They don't really integrate any of those parts of that mode or very little of those parts into that mode other than them just being hanging off of the character, the toy. Third party. So I'm a little torn on this one because there's it gets difficult to draw the line between third party licensed products, third party unlicensed products, and then knockoffs. But I'll go third party licensed products in this very specific one. There's Transformers products that are released from a brand that's not Transformers itself, like Nike, or there has been a usable mouse and USB, that kind of thing, where they still feature these characters and still feature these designs officially, but they're not a mainstay of that brand, right? It's just an easy way of getting, hey, you're doing this cool thing. Well, why don't we throw my cool thing in? We can both profit off of it. Truck, not monkey. So this is used to describe people who don't like the thought of the Transformers having gone through the Beast era or Beast Wars era. So the animals, they'd rather see the original Generation 1 character as like vehicles or the characters as vehicles rather than accepting that robots ever transformed into animals. That was my last one. I'm going to link the page for this down. I know there's some that I skipped out because they they feel like they fall under the same umbrella, and I could have just easily kind of smushed them in there. And then there's also acronyms that I'm not going to cover because again, it doesn't feel like a fan terminology to say acronym. I think using specific acronyms makes more sense, and I don't want to try to squeeze too much more into this video. And with that, if you like the video, like hearing me ramble about nonsense for however long, or if you have any feedback for me or suggestions, please feel free to let me know. Otherwise, if you like the videos, please feel free to subscribe. And I think that's about it. Until next time, farewell.